Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Pigskin Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread of the Tuscaloosa News, joined as always by BamaOnline.com senior analyst Travis Reier. The Talkin Tide podcast available to you at our web host at megaphone.com. Also get it on any podcasting app you prefer, including Apple Podcasts. And of course, you can catch us live and recorded at YouTube or at Facebook. So check us out in those locales as well. Want to thank our sponsors very quickly. Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa, of course. Also North River Dental Associates, and finally DraftKings, our corporate sponsor. Thanks to them. A little bit more on them a little later in the program. Travis, we start out taking a look at this disappointing road loss for Alabama, overtime on the road. 80-77, the final score against LSU. That closes out the regular season for the Crimson Tide. They finished 9-9 in league play. Definitely a disappointing league record given what they had accomplished in non-conference play. And they enter the SEC tournament sitting with the number 6 seed.
Yeah, and they say what your record, you are who your record says you are, and 9-9. That pretty much says it. I think in the league play, you saw flashes. Really, Saturday's loss was kind of a summation of everything we saw from late December through Saturday. Flashes, right? Flashes of some decent three-point shooting, flashes of some connectivity. Not enough flashes maybe of defensive prowess, although it had to be better than it was against Texas A&M midweek. And it was. You heard Nate talk about that postgame Saturday. But the one constant, just not valuing the basketball enough, not valuing every possession enough. And also in-game scenarios, sometimes you got to put your foot on the baseline and at least attempt to take a charge. You just can't open up the baseline for drives and defensive issues at times. But yeah, I thought it was just kind of a highlight and a low light reel of what we've seen from this team throughout conference play.
Yeah, no doubt. And they've played twice since we last podcasted. Had an extremely disappointing loss to Texas A&M at home. They lost that game by, 19 points, I want to say. Just a disaster of an outing to close things out at Coleman Coliseum. Gave up 50 points defensively in the second half of that Texas A&M game, and frankly just got blown out. Nate Oates, highly critical of his team. Following that game. Then they come back against LSU with an opportunity to lock up the number 5 seed in the conference tournament. Didn't do it. Had an opportunity to go to, win their 10th conference game, win their 20th overall game, kind of be over the hump 500 wise in the league against LSU. Could not get that done. Keon Ellis 19, Javon Quinterly scored 16 for Alabama, but 21 turnovers, as you mentioned, not valuing possessions, certainly a huge factor in the game. 3-point shooting, Alabama was 11 out of 40, which once again, it isn't going to cut it if you're going to live and die by the three, which they essentially do. And free throw shooting, nothing wrong with that. 20 out of 22. They've been pretty darn consistent at the free throw line, Travis, but not from deep, which is where they've got to be better.
Yeah, what field goal kicking has been for Alabama throughout the years, that's kind of what free throw shooting seemingly has been throughout the years. Not so much this year, but you just can't continuously survive these 20-plus turnover outings. And the thing that bothers you is that, okay, LSU came into the game Saturday leading the SEC among the top 5 teams in Division I college basketball in steals. Right? Around 11 steals per game. And LSU had 16 steals in the game Saturday. But how many of those really were steals, Chase? I mean, there's takeaways and then there's giveaways. Okay, right. You take away the basketball, that's one thing. But there's times where Alabama, because it's attention to detail, simple things like no one's really pressuring you and the ball just goes off a foot or a hand or Something like that, or on the catch, trying to one hand everything all the time. I know I sound like Norman Dale at this point. That's not what I'm trying to do. I understand you're trying to play with pace. You're trying to play at a tempo, and you're trying to get shots up as quickly as you possibly can. But yeah, that's what it goes back to for me, is just value. Just where's the value in every possession? Where's the value in getting defensive stops from time to time? And so wasteful, I think, is one way to describe this team in some ways. And you say all that, and you still understand, as dangerous as they are to themselves a lot of times, they can still be very dangerous in this postseason coming up. And that's the silver lining in all this. There is a postseason beyond the SEC tournament, and it's not the NIT.
Right, right. A couple things that I noticed, Travis, that are kind of along those lines. One, sometimes, yeah, it was a bounce off a foot, off a hand, like you said, a lazy pass here and there. But beyond that, sometimes it's not a lazy pass. Sometimes the problem is too much laziness trying to get open, right? And you saw that on several inbounds plays. I thought Alabama had a lot of trouble inbounding the ball. There was a sequence in the first half where J.D. Davison was inbounding a ball and no one wanted to get open. It gets deflected out of bounds. He gets another shot at it. Same thing. No one wants to get open. And what they're doing too much of, to me, is instead of actually breaking away from a defender with some hustle, they want to put a hand, and I'm hand gesturing for our YouTube viewers, so I guess I better explain myself for the audio listeners. But too many of these guys on the inbounds pass, Travis, they want to stick one hand on the defender and then stretch the opposite hand out and say, "Here's your target," instead of just hustling away from your defender, right? And
I'll tell you something else. Once you're scouted too, right? Things like if you don't step to all passes, if you don't go meet passes, but then you're also not a team that makes teams pay with cuts to the bucket off the ball. Now you get everything jumped in the passing lanes. And so just some things like that. Step to passes. And if you're getting that type of getting that type of heat defensively, you got to be able to cut off the ball as well. And everything's on the ball for this team. The screens are on the ball. Everything, and you understand that's a big part of the way Nate Oates teams are going to play basketball. And when it's good, it's great. But when it's not, it's this sort of inconsistency and outright mess a lot of times.
They had to burn another timeout late in the game with Keon Ellis on an inbounds pass when he couldn't find anybody open. So those things stuck out to me. And of course, obviously, and I wrote about this for the Tuscaloosa News after the game, you got James Rojas, who's a favorite of Nate Oates for sure. He's a hustle guy. He's the one guy on the team that'll take a charge.
The one.
Well, he's on the floor for the last 3 minutes of regulation and all of overtime, and he's a 14-minute a game player for you, right?
Yeah.
So I asked Oates about it after the game, and he said, look, he's the guy who talks us through stops. Well, if you only got one guy talking your defense through stops and he's only playing 14 minutes a game on average, then I guess you got to have him on the floor in crunch time. But what about who's talking you through stops for 26 minutes a game?
Yeah, and that's something I've talked about. I even tweeted about it, I think, during the game Saturday. Some teams are just too cool to communicate. And maybe that's not it. Maybe it's just personality. You don't have those type of personalities, but man, it's tough when you don't on the defensive end. If you're not talking, you're going to give up a lot of easy buckets and a lot of breakdowns and missed coverages. And you didn't see it as much last year. Certainly Herb Jones had a lot to do with that, but that was a team that in terms of accountability in areas like that, there was a price to pay if you didn't participate in that type of interaction. You get the sense just watching Alabama play, there isn't a lot of communication. There's not a lot of talking. There's, if James Rojas, your only guy that's kind of talking you through it, as you pointed out, as a 14, 15 minute per game guy, that's a lot of minutes still out there that you got to try to fill.
They need a guard to step up. They need a guard in a leadership role, not a points and assist role. They can all score. They can pass. I mean, it's a lot of gifted players on the roster. There's not a rally guy, at least among the guards, who I think necessarily elevates everybody else. And it's a little late in the year to find that kind of guy. We'll see if they can maybe find a little bit more leadership in the SEC tournament. But yeah, that's what it's looking like as they enter SEC play. And I like Oates' honesty for sure. He's not afraid to.
He doesn't run from it. No.
He calls it like he sees it. He was absolutely exasperated after that Texas A&M loss, and he's been and of course I've seen some Nate Oates press conferences before, although now in the last couple of weeks since I joined the T News, I'm a little closer to it, and it's definitely refreshing. I met him in the hallway after they beat South Carolina for the first time, Travis, down in the Coleman tunnel, and he says, "Where are you coming from?" And I
up the street.
You know what I told him? I said, "Coach, I'm coming from NFL.com, but fear not, I know my hoops." So
yeah.
At any rate, that's it's going to be interesting to see how he handles this team going down the stretch. He's obviously frustrated losing the last couple games the way he did, especially A&M. He felt like the defense was a little better against LSU. Certainly, it was terrible against the Aggies.
Yeah, the A&M effort in the second half, that looked like a team playing with house money and knew it. Like, we're not going to win the SEC. We're out of that race. We're a 5-6 seed in the tournament, the SEC tournament, and we're a shoe-in for an at-large bid. That's what that effort looked like in the second half. Disinterested, I guess, one way to put it.
Looks like the Commodores are the dogs as Alabama's first SEC tournament opponent. Travis, how do you see that Vandy Georgia matchup shaping up?
Well, if it's Vanderbilt, Scottie Pippen will shoot 3,428 free throws. So just go ahead and get ready for that. You would think Vandy would be the tougher matchup with the way the Commodores improved throughout the season, and given just the ineptitude of this Georgia team. But there is that W over Alabama that we can go back to. Thankfully, the SEC tournament is not being contested at Stegeman Coliseum and instead will be down in Tampa. So, that's a silver lining for Alabama. I would think it's going to be Vanderbilt that Alabama sees in that second round matchup. That's going to be a late one, too, on that Thursday night. But again, who knows, Chase?
Yeah.
Who knows what to think about this Alabama team? I mean, I can see Alabama coming out, playing well, and winning that game rather comfortably, whether it's Georgia or Vanderbilt. I can see Alabama going home after Thursday night too.
Well, in the postseason, obviously it's one and done. You got to string together wins. You got to be consistent, and that's the last. That's what Alabama's not done at all here of late. So
here's what I think. I think the second round game before maybe even a final might be Alabama's toughest game down in Tampa. Because if they can come out and play well on Thursday night, see the ball go through the hoop, take care of the basketball reasonably well, and their psyche is in a good place. I know they've got Kentucky on that side, and that seems to be an annual rite of passage for Alabama in the SEC tournament. But I to be honest with you, the most uncertainty, the most discomfort I would have for Alabama going down to Tampa will be Vandy or Georgia, especially if it's Vandy, because I think Vandy is a little more well-rounded, both on the perimeter and in the paint. And so I would think that could be a tougher matchup than Georgia. But from there, who really knows? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to imagine Alabama putting together 2 good games back to back, much less 3 in the SEC tournament or the NCAA tournament. We shall see how that finishes out. The Talkin Tide podcast on the Pigskin Podcast Network. We are going to thank a couple sponsors here, as we always do. Very quickly, we're going to tell you all about North River Dental Associates and Dr. Jack Smalley, the great job he does with his professional staff of dental hygienists right off of Watermelon Road at 1100 Fairfax Park. On a routine cleaning, they'll get you in and out of there door to door in less than an hour. You got to get the family in there twice a year like you're supposed to for that, but they can do all kinds of dental work, the cosmetic dentistry, porcelain veneers, endodontics. They do it all over there. They got the teeth whitening services for the facial features. They got the Botox and Juvederm treatments going on as well. Give them a call, North River Dental Associates, 752-3506, or visit them online at northriverdentists.com.
I'm going to tell you about Peterbrook Chocolatier out there at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hill section of Tuscaloosa. We told you it is on to Easter at Peterbrook Chocolatier, but it's also not too early to go ahead and start making those summer camp plans for the kiddos. In fact, you can do parties of really any age, gatherings of any age. You know, your mom, dad, grandparent, you want to have your own dipping party at Peterbrook Chocolatier, you can get that lined up at 205-752-0211, but the transition is taking place from Valentine's to Easter, and whether it's the traditional favorites like the chocolate bunnies, or maybe you're a Peeps fan. Not me personally, but a lot of people love Peeps, so knock yourself out. They got you covered with those at Peterbrook Chocolatier. No Easter basket is complete without Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North.
Loved them Peeps when I was a kid, because when I was a little kid, there was no such thing as something too sweet.
Right.
And now as you get older, there is such a thing as something too sweet. That's it for me. But
yeah, I'm with you on the Peeps. Yeah.
That Peterbrook chocolate, though, is not too sweet. It is just right over there. Right. And I cannot deny it's the best chocolate in Tuscaloosa. Finally going to tell you all about our corporate sponsor. That would be DraftKings. Hoops fans, it's the official sports betting partner of the NBA, that DraftKings Sportsbook. The deal cannot be beat this week. New customers can bet just $1 on any team in the NBA. Get $150 in free bets if that team wins. It is just that simple. DraftKings also giving all new customers a free shot at millions in total prizes with their first deposit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use the promo code TPPN. Bet just $1 on any NBA team. Get $150 in free bets if they win. That's with promo code TPPN at the DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the National Football League. Travis, of course, just a few more minutes remaining in this edition of Talkin Tide. Figured we would turn our attention to the NFL Combine and the Alabama performances there. And as it turned out, not a lot of activity, not only from Alabama players, but from the entire contingent of prospects that went to the Combine this year. I think more than ever, they passed on a lot of these drills, deferring to pro day, et cetera. We can get into that for a minute, but first, a quick look at the Alabama players who did participate in the 40-yard dash, mostly outstanding times. Only 4 of them actually ran a 40. Jalen Armour Davis, the best of them, at 4.39, super time for him for sure. Christian Harris runs a 4.44. Excellent time for the 225, 230-pound inside linebacker. Brian Robinson, Travis, 4.53. We know we've talked about him being a power guy and not a breakaway guy. Well, at his size, a 4.53, the scouts are certainly going to like that. So he did just fine. And finally, Slade Bolden went ahead and ran. He ran a 4.66, which was just barely the worst time among the wide receivers who ran the 40 at the combine. I think 4.65 was just above him. But other than those four, Travis, nobody ran the 40. Fedarian Mathis participated in a few drills, although he did not run. And the rest of them took a pass for various reasons, right? Jamison Williams, John Mechie, obviously not right physically. Evan Neal, he looks like a Greek god at 337 pounds. Looks like a tight end, for goodness sakes, but he's going to wait till pro day as well.
Yeah, I think some of the guys, too, that didn't take part in the 3-cone and the shuttle stuff were wise in not doing so, because apparently times in those areas were not good. And I guess this was the first year maybe that they tacked those onto the 40 in the same day.
The bench press was the stickler there. And you're right. Now the agility drills, the participation in those was absolutely way down, and it was because of that. Here's what happened: the wide receivers go on the first day,
right?
And when the wide receivers went on the 3-cone and the 20-yard shuttle, and the times weren't nearly as good as people thought, well, that killed it for the rest of the week. Because the very next day it was the running back's turn.
Nope.
Not one running
and
back.
And good for Brian Robinson, because we can talk about Brian Robinson's 40, but his 3-cone and his shuttle stuff might be more important for him in terms of how he's already being perceived as a runner, kind of a one cut straight up and down. So the 4.53 is great, but I'm thinking maybe, Chase, that the shuttle and 3-cone stuff might be more important for him.
They'll be paying attention to that for sure at his pro day, and a lot of them. But you're right; he does have that reputation as a one-cut power guy. He did run an excellent time. He'll be doing the rest of these.
Can he make the first guy miss enough? I guess.
Right. Right. And the 3-cone especially, I think. And then, the 3-cone, it's indicative for a lot of positions.
It's brutal.
More than others.
The 3-cone's brutal, man. Just watching guys at workouts go through that.
Yep. Yep. It's not a lot of fun. That's for sure. But participation was way down on that. The other thing with the bench press is that until this year, the bench press has always been held the day before you go through all the other physical testing. And this year, the combine decided they're going to throw the bench press in on the same day with all of it. The agent said, if you think I'm going to have my guy max out on the bench and then run the 40 of his life a couple hours later, you're out of your mind. And so only a lot of guys didn't bench and ran. A lot of guys benched but didn't run. And so now all the more gets deferred to pro days. There were only 33 guys at the whole not counting DBs here on Sunday, but going into Sunday, they only had a little over 30 guys do both the bench and the 40. And guess who most of them were? Offensive linemen.
Right?
Because if you're an offensive lineman, well, you can bench and run the 40 in the same day, because if you don't run a great 40, who cares?
Right.
But that's
yeah. And just like you said at the outset, participation in general, and you've been around this for so long now, it leads you to wonder, at what point does it at all, or to at least to some extent, hurt the television show that this event has become? Do we get to a point where the NFL considers paying guys, to work out at this event? Because, or are we just going to tune in anyway? Does NFL look at it like, as long as they show up and they have a presence here of some kind, they do the media stuff, and even if they just do it the Evan Neal way, and the way we saw some other guys do it, is that enough to still keep the interest where it's been here in the last decade or so?
It's an interesting question, I think. And by the way, guess the NFL for the first time this year also move the broadcast to prime time, right?
It's a big time television show, man.
Right. It's always, and so this was probably not a great year for the NFL to have this dip in participation, given that they're just now putting it on in prime time. But the 40 is the glamour event. The 40 is what a lot of people tune in for. And so if everything else falls apart, at the very least, I think you'll see the NFL do whatever it can to make sure that as many guys as possible are running the 40. I would not surprise me at all if next year you see the bench press go right back to the day before again.
Right.
So they get
participation.
A little more, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then another factor, Travis, is that NFL clubs are phasing the 40 out of their evaluations because they're going with the GPS numbers now more than ever.
Play speed, things like that.
Yeah, and it varies team to team, right? Some of them value the 40 more than others still, but 10 years from now, they're all going to be on that GPS stuff. I think primarily, and they like it because it tracks a guy with pads on the field.
It's relevant.
Yeah.
It translates to the field more than a track event, essentially.
Yeah. So anyway, time's changing. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, you even wonder about the All-Star games. If at some point, if participation becomes an issue, do they have to consider compensation or, ways to make it more attractive to get guys to participate,
Senior Bowl's on the upswing. Lately, the Senior Bowl has been getting a lot, the participation there has certainly been very strong.
Right.
But you're right. To whatever extent there's money to be made on the draft process itself,
it's an industry, big time. Yeah.
Some changes and some adjustments are going to have to be made, I think, because these players are more and more they'd rather do it on their pro day, and I don't blame them because if you're training for 6 weeks. To run a 40 and do the vertical and these shuttle drills, the 3-cone, whatever else is on the platter. Well, when you get to the combine, for the first 3 days you're there, they break all your routines. They put you through the personal interviews. You have to spend a whole day at the hospital. It's a little more difficult to maintain the diet, the training, and everything else. And so these trainers that are paid good money to train these guys for 6 weeks, when they get to the combine, those routines get blown up for 3 days.
Yeah, and that's big.
And that's why times are better. People like to say that the reason pro day times tend to be better than combine times is because of some kind of home field advantage. That's bullcrap. The reason they're better at pro day is because for pro day, these guys can optimize and fine tune right up until the day before.
Right.
Whereas at the combine, the last day they have to do whatever they want to prepare is actually 3 days before or 4 days before they run, as opposed to the day before.
And absolutely, and it used to be more along the lines of first round types that would defer to their pro day. Or private workouts, but I think you're seeing more and more guys in general, regardless of projection. They're saying, "No, I'll just see you at pro day."
Pro days are going to be the show.
Yep,
they're absolutely going to be the show.
And look, for networks like the SEC network, it's great.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
I mean, because that's what they do with the pro days around the SEC. For the NFL, network, they'll still be there. I get that, but man, the SEC network will post up like it's game day.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How long, Travis, before we see ESPN, NFL Network, SEC Network, what have you, leaning on schools to put pro day on in prime time?
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be covered,
in
right?
the stadium. Yeah.
So,
oh man, and look, from a recruiting perspective, if you're the school, that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
If you want to put it in prime time where all of our targets can definitely see it, probably doesn't hurt the feelings of Nick Saban and some other guys, I would think.
That could be coming. We shall see.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. Had a whole lot of fun. Be sure to join Travis and I next weekend when we reconvene. We'll be talking about Alabama's outcome in the SEC tournament and plenty more next weekend right here on Talkin Tide. For Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread of the Tuscaloosa News. We'll talk to you then.